This is the 59th episode of the Effective Executive podcast and YouTube channel. And I've given this the title of T-Mobile Fail. Um, and last, or a couple months ago in July, I did an episode on doing customer surveys in 2021. I'll put a link to it down below if you're on the YouTube channel. Uh, but in it, I talked about how you should conduct a survey and those types of things. And during the course of that episode, I mentioned Sprint slash T-Mobile, and you know, they are ones that use a net promoter score, the 1 to 10 thing. And if you thought their service is good, it's typically on an 8 to 10 scale. They know that you're someone that will talk well of them. And a 7's kind of the intermediate, and everything less than that is bad. And as I mentioned in that episode, I rated them very poorly because I had a couple of experiences that were really maddening. So I rated them a 2 as far as would I recommend them to someone. And then I also rated them a 2 on their signal strength. And that's just because it's bad here. And even with the combined network of Sprint and T-Mobile, I still get 1 bar. So it didn't change anything for me. So, in that survey, it also gave me the opportunity to share why I felt this way. And I did. I told them specifically what type of issues I was running into. And I finally decided I'd make a phone call because I never heard back from them after we did the survey. Sound familiar if you're a customer? Not just for T-Mobile, but people send out these surveys, or corporations send out these surveys, but you never hear anything back from them. Or, I spent the time to tell them why and all those types of things. They say, "Oh, thank you for your feedback," and nothing. So it didn't resolve anything. I waited a couple of weeks before I actually called them. But the issues were that my wife's phone, I had traded it in. I'd done an upgrade. And it makes sense because she likes to have the new phone. Me, I could care less. So it just is not one of the things that bothers me, is not having the latest phone. My son's the same way. My daughter's the same way. They like to have the latest upgrade. So what they said was, okay, well, just go ahead and send in her old phone, and we'll give you a credit of, I can't remember, I think it was like $25 a month or something off of the upgrade. So, had a list of instructions that you had to follow. And one thing that we do very well here is follow instructions, especially my wife. She is very meticulous about going through and following instructions. So she did, because what she had to do was, before she sent it back, was, erase stuff off of her phone. And like I said, there was a whole laundry list of things, including unlocking the phone. So with regards to my son's phone, the issue was I had called and I said, on all of our phones, asking kind of when they would be paid off. And all of them were to be paid off like within a month, except for my son's, well, they told me at the time that all of our phones, all 4 phones, would be paid off, within a month or two. And so I got a text from Sprint at the time saying basically, no, your son's phone isn't coming off. Here's a text message telling you it's not coming off. And so it gave me nothing else, although I had called in to get this information. I just didn't get it off the website. I talked to an agent, a representative for Sprint slash T-Mobile. They said all 4 of them are coming off. Great. So, so obviously when I got this text, I was a bit surprised. Why am I still having to continue to pay for my son's phone? And that I, you know, there was no reasonable explanation. They don't respond back to their text messages, regardless. So I wind up calling in after no one called me with regards to the survey and some of the problems I was experiencing. I got a hold of Gerald, and Gerald, he was nice enough, but he took forever. I explained the story as I just have now, and I said, my son's phone is having, should have come off. The agent said, and I got this. Oh, well, the problem is that the contract reads something different. Okay, so why did the sales representative or the person I talked to on the phone tell me that all 4 phones were coming off? Well, I can't really explain that. I said, why, how much longer do I have to pay? And he was some unbelievable length of time that I still owed, and we'd been paying for a couple years. So anyway, I wanted to get that part taken care of, and with regards to my wife's phone, I wanted that, wanted either my phone back or, some type of relief on her particular trade-in, because I hadn't gotten any credit for it. So as I talked to Gerald, one thing that I learned was there was at least with this particular agent, there was an accusation basically that we had not sent the phone back unlocked. Okay, fine. Then send me the phone back. It's our phone. We've paid for the phone. Oh, we don't do that. It's in the small print somewhere is basically what he said. And he also said that there was liquid damage to the phone. Well, I record phone calls out. In Indiana, you only have to have one-party consent. Now, every state's different, but for Indiana, it's one-party consent. This is not somebody just listening in on a line. I was participating in this conversation, and they record their phone calls. And at that point, I decided, well, I ought to tell Gerald, that I am recording the phone call, and I know that there wasn't any liquid damage to my wife's phone. We buy the most expensive cases for him because we have a history of breaking phones. So at that point, he kind of backpedaled on that, which he should, because it wasn't truthful. But all of this took 90 minutes of on and off hold. I'm not kidding. 90 minutes. Actually, it was probably more like an hour and 40 minutes that he and I were going back and forth. He had to look up something. He had to ask somebody something. It's very aggravating when you have to go through these things. But I was doing it knowing I'd be doing something like this for my interaction. So he came back and basically said, okay, for your sons, we're going to, I'm going to take that off. Are we done with your son's phone? I said, well, except I've been overpaying for months now on a phone that probably was paid off, 5 to 6 months ago. And, so there was a lot of roundabout on that. And, it just, you've experienced it. I know everybody has. I'm not the only one. But to take that long to get through this first line. And so, I was kind of getting, especially after, Gerald told me that, there was liquid damage to the phone. I kind of lost faith in him, and trust in him. So I asked, and he actually had offered to escalate the call. And so I did, and I got Paul. Paul. By the time I got to Paul, I was very unhappy. And Paul said, "Oh, I hear you're recording our calls. If we're going to negotiate, I want you to turn your recording off." Well, I'm not required to, but I did because he wanted to, maybe made him feel more at ease. But regardless, he's recording a call, and I said, it doesn't really matter. I mean, if this has to go to a court or something, I can obviously, subpoena the recording that they're doing for quality control purposes. And you get worn down on these things, and I probably would have handled it differently if I wasn't going to be doing this episode. But I wound up getting my son's phone paid off. And in a bizarre way, even though it was my wife's phone that I wanted to get some relief on, Paul wound up giving me relief on my daughter's phone and paid. Basically, I don't have to pay on the lease anymore. We'll see. I'm still waiting for the actual bill, which that will be interesting. And I gave Paul an earful. I've worked with telecoms all over the world, and this had to be the absolute worst. But they all begin with the same type of mentality, which is, how can we give out the least amount of money even though we screwed up, is kind of the attitude. And this is typically where I always start with, especially telecoms, in dealing with them. They have this mindset that if they can just squeeze, a few dollars out of you and they don't have to give you as much credit, they're going to make you happy. I wasn't happy. They knew that. But anyway, this episode's getting long, but I'm going to do in episode 60. I'll give you takeaways for the consumers and the executives. What you can do in this particular situation, because like I said, I've worked with most telecoms, and they all kind of do the same thing. They think they're being smart, but they're not that smart. But regardless, one of the things that they did that I thought was hilarious, especially after explaining to Paul about the survey and also to Gerald, that the surveys don't really play much of a role, because I obviously had said something about the problems that I was having, and nothing was done about it. But they sent me a survey after I got done talking to both Gerald and Paul and, quote unquote, I guess, resolved the issue. And it was interesting. I probably would have done things differently, and I'll explain what those things are in next week's episode, in episode 60. And you'll pick up some things from there. I'll do a quick review, so somebody hasn't listened to this episode for the full detail, give kind of a summary. But that's it for this week. Something a little bit different, but I did a episode a few weeks ago on Disney, and on YouTube it kind of blew up. It really got a lot of traction. People could kind of relate to some of the things that I talked about with regards to 4 lessons. 4 lessons from Disney's decline is actually the name of that episode, but it's gotten pretty good traction on YouTube. So that's it for this week. I'll talk to you next week.